A mystery encounter with the Hat Man. Rebecca was 6 years old in 1978 when something horrifying walked into her life. "When I was a kid, I saw what I now know is called the Hat Man," Rebecca explained. "The Hat Man I saw talked to me." She now lives every day in Florida. Rebecca grew up in Missouri and spent parts of 1977 and 1978 at her grandmother's house in Independence, Missouri. "During this time in my life, my mother, sister, and I lived with my grandparents off and on due to our own circumstances and the fact that my grandfather was in and out of the hospital," she said. Rebecca remembers other family members residing in her grandparents' house at that time, taking the spare bedroom she usually shared with her sister. That night, Rebecca and her sister slept in her grandmother's room, and they soon noticed they weren't alone. "My sister and grandma were sleeping in the bed like normal, and I was sleeping between the two of them with my head at the foot of the bed," Rebecca said. "I had a horrible nightmare, one where the dresser drawers were opening and closing on their own, and ghosts in clothing were flying out." Rebecca remembers her dream self lying in the same place as her body. "Most dreams are in other places or familiar places, but never from the perspective of where you are actually sleeping," she said. "I woke up from the dream very scared. Frightened, she lightly kicked, trying to wake her grandmother, but couldn't rouse her. I debated getting up and finding my mom, but I would have had to walk past the dresser from my dream and decided that was too scary," she said. "I shifted my gaze away from the dresser and up to the window behind the bed's headboard, where I saw the man. The man, a dark, looming figure, seemed to stand on the headboard, but Rebecca now wonders if the man stood behind the headboard and was extremely tall." Rebecca described the man as wearing a long flowing coat, a top hat, and carrying a cane. He had no real features, but was a solid object that blocked the light from the window behind him. "I was terrified because there was someone else in the room and because I recognized it as non-human." Rebecca and the Hat Man stared at one another for what could have been minutes or seconds when the figure lifted its arm and pointed at her. He said, "This is your last chance," Rebecca said. His voice did not fill the room. "The best way I can describe it is that it filled my head." The voice was flat with no residual sound, as if everything surrounding the words had been removed. After the Hat Man spoke those 5 cryptic words, he put down his arm and disappeared. She told her family about the encounter the next day, but they paid little attention. "Little kids are always filled with stories that grown-ups nod and smile while hearing," she said. "I vaguely remember being afraid of Grandma's room for a while, but not much else following the incident." She didn't bring up the Hat Man encounter again until she was in her teens, and this time her family listened. Everyone believed in ghosts, so it was another neat ghost story from a family member for everyone except my aunt, she said. This is because her aunt has had more than one ghostly encounter that is eerily similar to her own. She said she had seen the same man in that same house. Although her fear of her grandmother's room has long passed, as has her terror of that long-ago meeting with the Hat Man, one question remains. "I've tried to figure out what this is your last chance means," she said. "My grandfather died somewhere around this time, but I cannot be certain if the Hat Man appeared before or after his death. I do know that Grandpa was not in the house at the time, but he spent quite a bit of time in the hospital toward the end of his life. Was the Hat Man telling me this was my last chance to talk with him? I don't know. Many cultures from around the world have always claimed to have seen shadowy beings lurking around. One variation of this type of entity is the Hat Man. This type of entity is mostly featureless, although they clearly have masculine forms and wear old-fashioned hats. It's also been suggested that this strange entity is somewhat of an inspiration for Freddy Krueger. Wes Craven has talked about an experience he once had when he was a young boy, in which he saw a scary-looking man walking down the street wearing a bowler hat. The man had scars all over his face. He looked up at Craven through the window and gave off a sense of foreboding. While this could have just been an ordinary guy and not a shadowy person or demon, it was still a creepy experience. People who reportedly come across a hat man usually claim to feel a frightening feeling, as if they are being threatened. While some ghosts don't seem aware of the presence of the living, it seems that shadow people do. Witnesses claim that, despite not seeing his face, they have a sense that the hat man is staring right at them. Furthermore, it would seem that this entity's sole purpose in visiting people is to make them as uncomfortable and frightened as possible. They normally don't try to communicate, except for the fact that they are emitting bad vibes. Their mere presence alone is enough to make someone feel extremely uncomfortable and even threatened. This is what the person who met the hat man says: "When I was around 10 or 11, we lived in a small rural town that was a few miles away from a normal town. Anyway, there were only like 30-ish people there, and we all knew each other. Well, one day I was watching SpongeBob, and I just had this weird butterfly feeling in my gut, so I decided to look to my right out of the bedroom to check on my dad. That's when I saw him. A tall man with a big detective like that and glowing red eyes was standing over my dad. I didn't know what to do and freaked out. I kept yelling my dad's name, but he wouldn't wake up. The creature didn't even bother with me, but eventually, my dad woke up, and that's when the thing looked at me and turned around fast. He walked toward the back of our house, and I followed him. There was no door exit this way, so it wasn't like he was trying to escape. Well, he was really fast, and I barely saw his coattail right when he entered the bathroom. I ran in, and he was gone. Nothing. No one was there. I looked everywhere. Even in the cabinet, under the sink, and in the water tank on the toilet. He was gone, and there are thousands of such stories. Still, there's no evidence to suggest that something very bad happens after someone sees the hat man. The ghost or whatever it may be, usually goes away after a few moments, and nothing bad ever seems to happen afterward. So, are shadow people really malevolent? Is the hat man really a threat to anyone? It seems that this phenomenon provides more questions than answers. Most people who witness hat men claim that they're solid and definitely an outline of a male body. It's only natural to assume that they're real enough to be more than just the witness's imagination. One theory is that they could be physical manifestations of one's own psyche and are somehow created subconsciously after an individual experiences some problems in life. Whatever the case may be, anyone who ever witnesses a hat man will undoubtedly feel creeped out by him. Whether he's an actual entity or a psychic manifestation of someone's subconscious, he definitely gives off negative vibes and a sense of foreboding to anyone around him.